In this video, we're going to distinguish between the individual demand a consumer has for a particular good or service and the market demand for that good or service. Let's start with the review of the basic definition of demand. Demand is an individual's willingness or ability to buy a good at a range of prices in a particular period of time. Individual demand is just what it sounds like. It's how much a particular person is willing to buy of a particular good at a range of prices in a period of time. Let's have a look at the demand schedules already provided to us here. What we are given is 5 different individuals' demand for candy at a range of prices in 1 week. So these Q1s through Q5s represent the individuals demanding candy in the market for candy. So this is the individual demand of 5 different individuals. Let's study the figures and see if each of these individual demands portray what we learned as the law of demand, the inverse relationship between a good's price and quantity. Notice that individual 1, that's the column here under Q1, demands only 2 pieces of candy per week at a price of $5, but as the price drops, the quantity demanded increases. We can see that individual 1 demands up to 10 pieces of candy in a week at a price of $1. Individual 2 likewise demonstrates the law of demand. At high prices, this individual actually demands no candy, but as the price falls, she starts to demand greater quantities of candy, up to a quantity of 7 pieces of candy at a price of $1. Individual 3 once again demonstrates the law of demand. At high prices, very low quantities of candy are demanded, but at low prices, a higher quantity is demanded. Individual 4 doesn't demand any candy at the higher prices of $5 and $4, but once again, as the price falls, that individual's quantity of candy demanded increases. Finally, individual 5 is our biggest demander here. Individual 5 demands 4 pieces at a price of $5, up to 12 pieces at a price of $1. For every consumer represented in this table, the law of demand can be seen at play. At higher prices, smaller quantities are demanded, but at lower prices, higher quantities are demanded. What we can try to do now is actually plot the individual demands of some of these consumers. Let's look at consumer number 1 in blue. If I plot some of the quantities that consumer 1 demands at these prices, I'll get the individual demand curve for consumer 1. Now notice that our values on the horizontal axis over here, the quantity axis, are quite a bit larger than each individual in this demand table is easily able to be graphed using. But I can put a couple estimated points here. At a price of $5, a very small quantity of candy is demanded by individual 1. As the price falls, slightly more candy is demanded. And when the price is down at $1, 10 pieces of candy are demanded. So the blue line I'm drawing here represents individual 1's, call this D1, individual demand for candy. I can do the same thing for individual 2. At a price of $5, 0 units are demanded by individual 2. As the price falls to $4, 1 piece of candy is demanded, and I'm just going to estimate because at a price of $1, I know 7 pieces of candy are demanded, so that gives me a demand curve for individual 2. That looks something like this. I'm not going to connect all the points there, my graph will get very cluttered if I start to do that. Let's look at individual 3, plot individual 3's demand curve. We're going to see a similar relationship here. At a price of $5, only 1 piece of candy is demanded, whereas at a price of $1, 7 pieces of candy is demanded. Connect those dots and I get individual 3's demand curve, call that D3, and so on. Let's go ahead and do individual 4. Individual 4 is quite cheap, or doesn't have a high demand for candy. Demands 0 units of candy until the price reaches $3 and then starts demanding candy, but only up to 5 units. So individual 4 I should say, has the lowest demand so far. There's individual 4. If I plot individual 5's demand, I'm going to see that individual 5 starts with the highest level and ultimately demands more candy than anybody else. So individual 5 has the highest level of demand. But this is not a graph you're going to draw very often. You're not going to draw a graph full of individual demand curves. What we are usually interested in is the market demand for a good, and that's what we're going to define next. Market demand is defined as the horizontal sum of all the individual demands for a particular good at a range of prices in a period of time. I'll leave it at that. We know that the rest of that definition involves a range of prices in a period of time. So, what are we getting at here? The market demand for candy can be determined by adding horizontally the sums of all the individual consumers' demands in this market. If we assume that there are only 5 candy consumers in this market, then the market demand, which I'm calling QM, this is market demand, equals Q1, the demand for the first consumer, plus Q2, plus Q3, and so on. Now, if there were hundreds of consumers in this market, we would have to add the horizontal sums of hundreds of consumers to find the market demand. If there were thousands of consumers, this would be a very large table indeed. But the point here is that the market demand is the sum of all the individuals' demands in that market, which I can quickly do now by adding horizontally the quantities demanded at each price along this demand schedule for the 5 individuals in the market. So at a price of $5, the market demand is the total quantity demanded among the 5 consumers. That's 2 plus 1 is 3 plus 4 is 7. I'll go ahead and do that for the rest of the prices in our table here. At a price of $4, the market demand is 3 plus 1, that's 4, plus 2 is 6, plus 6 is 12. At $3, we got 5 plus 3, that's 8, plus 4 is 12, plus 3 is 15, plus 9 is 24. And at $2, we've got 8 plus 6 is 14, plus 5 is 19, plus 4 is 23, plus 11 gives us a market demand of 32. And at a price of $1, we've got 10 plus 7 is 17, plus 6 is 23, plus 5 is 28, plus 12 is 40. So finally, we can plot our market demand for candy. And what we'll see is that it is the sum of all the individual demand curves. So these were my individual demand curves. Those are the individual demands. And market demand is going to be as if I compounded all of those. I'll plot my different points here. At a price of $5, we've got a total market quantity of 7. So if it went down, I'd be around 7 here. Didn't draw that very accurately. Let me clean that up. Price of $5, the market demand was the horizontal sum, which put me out here around 7 pieces of candy. So at $5, quantity demanded by the whole market was 7. At $4, the quantity demanded increased to 12. So that gives me a point right around here at 12. And as the price falls, quantity demanded continues to rise. $3 had a quantity demanded of 24. So that gives me a point right here. At $2, the quantity demanded was 32. It's right here. And finally, at $1, the quantity demanded was 40 amongst my 5 consumers. And notice that just as the law of demand would predict, I get a fairly linear downward sloping market demand curve. So here's my market demand curve. And if you look back at my 5 individual consumers' demand curves and the demand schedules for the 5 different consumers, all I did to find market demand was determine the horizontal sum of the individual consumers in that market. This is an oversimplified example of how the market demand for a good is found. In the real world, markets will have hundreds, thousands, or maybe even millions of consumers. But the point here is that each individual in a market has his or her individual demand, demonstrating the law of demand. At higher prices, we demand smaller quantities of nearly every good, such as candy in this example. But as the price of candy or any other good falls, individuals demand greater quantities of it, as shown by every individual's demand schedule in this table. Therefore, the market demand, shows the inverse relationship between all the individuals' willingness and ability to buy a good and the price of that good. As prices fall, the quantity demanded among all individuals in a market rises, giving us the market demand curve, which again is the horizontal sum of all the individuals' demands in that market.